Alright guys, so this economic war just keeps getting worse. Welcome aboard the USS Armageddon once again, and the last few days has really revealed quite a bit. Now the world is breaking away from the US, and that's why Canada signed $1 trillion worth of deals with China. Now Trump is also making a direct play for Greenland. It can't get any more obvious. Finally, G7 allies and NATO themselves, they can't deny the facts. Everyone and every nation is on the table for Trump to mess with. And truly, the justifications are getting crazier with each passing day. Besson said that the EU projects weakness and that the US projects strength, which makes it alright for the US to take over the territory.
If the United States were to take Greenland by force, how would that be different than Russia's annexation of Crimea?
Look, I believe that the Europeans will understand that this is best for Greenland, best for Europe, and best for the United States. I believe that the Europeans will understand that the best outcome is for the U.S. to maintain or receive control of Greenland.
So Europe will understand that is the justification. And if you think that is Twilight Zone material, we are about to sail deeper into the storm. Now, as we mentioned before, the US really wants Greenland for both economic and strategic reasons. Both just don't make sense, but the US sees that territory as a base for future operations. Now, the world is outraged. Denmark is sending troops all the way to Greenland. Macron is freaking out and he's calling for retaliation. And Trump himself is just making the situation worse. He just sent the Norwegian Prime Minister a letter straight from Crazy Town. It doesn't make any sense. Trump's gonna force Europe to kneel because he didn't get his Nobel Prize for stopping 8 wars. And I quote, "I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace." This is scary. And did Trump really use boat landings as a justification? Now this part really takes the cake. I have done more for NATO than any other person since its founding, and now NATO should do something for the United States. It's these moves that really shows everyone how unstable the US has gotten. Foreign policy and economic policy isn't stable at all. Trump can literally do the unthinkable in the next 24 hours, and it wouldn't be surprising at this point. And because of his new Monroe Doctrine or Don Roe Doctrine, the world is losing faith in the US economy. Even if Trump gets Greenland, the amount of money spent to develop it would be epic. Over $1 trillion in the next decade or so at the minimum. Now, in the last 5 days, US bonds they have been collapsing. The yield on a 10-year is going through the roof. It went from 4.13% to 4.26%, which is an incredible jump in just a few days. This is the highest level since September 2025. It isn't good for the economy because now borrowing rates across the country are going to go ballistic. Money is much more expensive now. Everything from mortgage rates to companies borrowing will get hit. Now, Trump's actions are undermining the very bedrock of the US economy, which is the ability to access cheap capital. And this locks the US into a future of currency debasement and the eventual debt default. And what happens if rates continue to stay high? The interest payments would eventually get unpayable. In the last fiscal year, the net interest payment crossed an insane $1 trillion. That's more than Medicare, Defense, or Medicaid. It's 50 times the amount the US spends on energy. The problem here is the growth of the interest payments. It is expected to grow by 76% over the next decade, and they will put it at $1.7 trillion by 2035, which is confounding. This is the Achilles heel of the US economy. It's something that China long figured out. Now, since 2022, the Chinese, they have been putting pressure on the US financial system by dumping their holdings of treasury bonds. The tariff war just confirmed Beijing's strategy, and it's really just self-preservation. Why would you fund your own containment? Does it really make sense to fund the administration that is working actively to clobber your economy? And that's why Beijing just sold another batch of US treasuries. They reduced their holdings by over $6 billion again in November. Despite the slight rebound in US bond values, then the Chinese they are still out. Their total holdings are now just $682 billion. It's the lowest level since 2008, before China helped the US with their bailout. And now there's zero incentive to help Trump out, definitely not doing a trade war. The recycling of dollars into US bonds is the main mechanism of global trade. China would effectively vendor finance the US, lend money to your own customers to buy your goods. But if the US is no longer your customer, what is the point of lending them money? China earned over $1.2 trillion in trade surplus last year without the US, and this stockpile is going to grow even bigger. China's foreign assets have exceeded Japan, and through their various entities, Beijing is going to deploy the money around the world. They are putting it everywhere except US Treasury bonds. Since 2014, China's reserve assets haven't really increased. That means as China sells down the treasuries as they buy more gold, the net amount has not really increased. China instead is growing their direct investments and portfolio, which means investing into supply chains and buying stocks around the world. There's simply no space left for US debt anymore. Whatever exists today will only get sold off in the months to come. Now, this chart confirms what we've been saying for the longest time. China is focusing on buying real assets. China wants to buy things that produces other things. And a big shout out to our sponsor today, Indigo Precious Metals. When it comes to buying gold and silver, I trust Indigo Precious Metals in Singapore. They have made investing in precious metals safe, fast, easy, and simple for both small and large scale buying. I've been stacking gold for over a decade now, and I've learned two things when buying. You want to buy authentic gold bullion, and you want to buy it at the lowest premium possible to stretch your dollars even further. And I'm glad to say I found both of this at Indigo Precious Metals. Indigo Precious Metals is a leading retailer in Singapore. They specialize in physical gold, silver, and platinum. They are my one-stop shop when it comes to buying bullion. Their prices are sharp, and they have the best brands on sale, and I can test the gold on the spot. So if you're looking to make your first gold purchase, Indigo Precious Metals is the best place to start. Whether it's 1 ounce or 1 kilo, this is the reputable dealer you are looking for. So take action today. Click on the link below and enjoy a discount on your first purchase with the code SEANFOO. Start your gold stacking journey today. Holding dollar assets is like a hot potato. The value will diminish over time. Even if yields are 5%, even if yields are 6%, real inflation is much higher, especially if Trump wants to embark on his adventure to take Greenland and his plan to extract Venezuelan oil. We are living in a simulation. This is a wild timeline and everything doesn't make sense anymore. The administration wants to borrow money from the world to punish the world. Now, China isn't playing that game anymore. What's the point? But for Trump, this isn't good because the amount of money in China, the potential is enormous. Chinese households have $7 trillion in time deposits coming due this year, and they have limited options to pile into. Chinese bond yields are very low at under 2%. Real estate is also quite risky. The money is going to shift into China's stocks and gold, and that's why Chinese equities are rising and gold keeps getting a bid. There are really few options for money in China today. Household investors don't really care about geopolitics. They care about earning a decent return, but even holding US bonds is a bad idea. The RMB, the Chinese currency, keeps appreciating while the dollar keeps falling. You don't want to hold US debt from a currency perspective. When you convert dollars to RMB, you might actually lose money despite earning a yield. And that's why it boggles the mind why Trump is just making things worse. As if the tariff war wasn't bad enough, he keeps reminding everyone that it is time to leave US markets and assets. And for NATO, they just got a rude awakening. Trump is going to squeeze them for Greenland, and it's not me saying it, it's Trump signaling what's going to happen, the unthinkable.
There are Russian destroyers, there are Chinese destroyers and bigger, there are Russian submarines all over the place. We're not going to have Russia or China occupy Greenland, and that's what they're going to do if we don't. So we're going to be doing something with Greenland, either the nice way or the more difficult.
So Europe is caught. Trump is going to do it the easy way or the hard way. Now, this sounds like some godfather kiss the ring stuff. It's crazy, but for the EU, can they fight back? Now, there are some things the Europeans can do, some things the EU can't do, some things that will lead to direct retaliation and just make the confrontation even worse. Now, it's simple to think that the Europeans would simply tariff the United States. After all, the damage looks like it would be massive. The EU accounts for 20% of total US imports, and that's over $300 billion of US goods flowing into the bloc. So if Brussels imposes a 20 or 30% tariff, it could cripple American exporters. The pain in the United States would be quite significant. But Trump still has other levers to pull. He could pull out of NATO and the defense agreements. Considering the EU is still fighting against Russia, it would freak Brussels out. The US can also counter-tariff Europe. Just raising the tariffs to 50% is as good as an embargo. EU exporters would also collapse in this case. So a direct trade war isn't something the Europeans can do without massive pain. And of course, Scott Bessent just want the EU not to try anything funny here.
Retaliation by the Europeans? How
That'll be the
concerned are
last
you?
one today, guys.
How concerned are you about retaliation? Excuse me, about the Europeans, this question.
I think it would be very unwise.
So what can they really do? Well, something we have talked about for length. They could emulate what China is doing and make it impossible for the US to fund their adventures. And that means not buying US assets and upsetting the entire financial system there. Now, this would be devastating for the US that needs asset prices to stay high no matter what. According to Deutsche Bank, the US has a big weakness. Yes, it has advanced AI chips, there is the US military, and the world's biggest consumer market is all over there. All those are advantages for sure. But those are funded by large deficits that need foreign money. The US has to keep borrowing money not just from China, but from EU countries as well. In total, EU investors, central banks, and entities, they own more than 10 trillion in US dollar assets, and this includes treasuries and equities. The entire US financial system is one big house of cards, and the damage caused can be devastating. If countries refuse to buy US bonds, there's only one way left to fund those enormous deficits. The Federal Reserve, the US central bank, will have to print money. The money supply increases, and because fewer countries hold dollars, the US itself bears the brunt of the damage. Local inflation is going to go through the roof. This gets worse because the US is importing less goods from the world. So this tsunami of dollars will stay exclusively within the United States itself. Now, central banks in Europe also hold a ton of treasury bonds. It's on par with Asia, which has China and Japan as bondholders. Adding the UK, France, and Belgium with everyone else, we have a total of $3.6 trillion. That's 40% of total foreign holders. If you throw in China and Canada, which would probably start deleveraging more bonds, you have nearly $5 trillion at risk. So the exposure the US faces to Europe is real, and the exposure is significant. If Trump really takes over Greenland, we can expect retribution from the EU. Now, there are many ways this can play out. If this was a few years ago, the EU dumping treasury bonds sounds extreme, but it's now par for the course. That 3.6 trillion that Europe holds is just reserve assets. It's central bank holdings. If the EU wants to go pedal to the metal, they can start imposing capital restrictions on investment money. They could forbid or restrict EU investors and companies from buying dollar assets. It's the next level and is something that Trump or Bessent won't expect. Besides treasury bonds, EU investors could liquidate $2 trillion worth of US corporate bonds. Now, US corporations and companies, they face even higher bond yields. The EU walking away will hammer down on demand. Yields will have to rise to compensate, and even then, they will have to rely on local US investors. The market starts to shrink. US stocks are also horribly exposed. EU investors hold 6 trillion in equities. Now the Nasdaq and the S&P are at risk. Stockholders will feel broke and consumption will drop. And that's not to mention the chaos surrounding the AI bubble. That would also include and crater all those data center buildings. Projects would grind to a halt. Now, this sounds like an extreme scenario, but let's get real. Trump taking Greenland is extreme, and it isn't a free win. Now, what we outlined could very well play out when countries get desperate enough. It is not impossible. But let me know what you think. Will Europe retaliate and start dumping their dollar assets? Will they finally cross the Rubicon? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.